Before I take you into tonight's story, let me set the tone. Out here under the black sun, we follow the shadows most people pretend aren't real. Stories whispered across campgrounds, passed between RV travelers who swear they saw something they can't explain. If you've ever spent a night alone in the backcountry, listening to the dark breathe just outside your windows, you already know these stories aren't fiction. Not entirely. So before we begin, take a second to ground yourself. Turn down the lights. Listen closely. And when this story is over, if you make it all the way to the end, tell me in the comments what you would have done differently, or if something like this has ever happened to you on the road. Your experiences help keep this fire burning, and they help remind the rest of us that the forest is never as empty as it seems. Welcome to Black Sun. Let's step into the dark. I should have listened to the unease in my gut the moment the road narrowed enough that my side mirrors brushed the rhododendron branches like fingers tapping on the glass. But sometimes a man ignores his instincts because the silence of the mountains promises something he doesn't get anywhere else. The feeling that the world has paused just long enough for him to breathe. My name is Elias Ward. I'm 43 years old, born and raised in Kentucky, and I've spent enough nights across the Appalachians to think I understood its moods. But last fall, somewhere along the ridgelines of West Virginia, I learned that these mountains don't care how seasoned you think you are. They just wait. And if you're unlucky, they watch. I was 3 days into a solo RV trip, something I did once or twice a year to reset my mind after the construction season wound down. My buddies always joked that I preferred the company of pines more than people, and maybe there was some truth to it. But that particular trip wasn't about solitude. It was about escape. I wasn't ready to admit it, but I'd been unraveling a bit since my younger brother died. Too sudden, too unfair, and too close to home. He and I used to camp together, and going alone always stirred up grief I didn't know what to do with. I think that's why I ignored the feeling creeping into my stomach when the gravel road turned from maintained to neglected, then from neglected to something that looked like nobody had driven on it in months. By the time I found a clearing big enough to level the RV, dusk was already sliding down the mountains like a slow shadow. The air was colder than I expected for early October, carrying a smell that reminded me of old stone and wet bark. Not decay exactly, but something old. Something that had settled in the ground long before any of us came along. I should have left right then. I should have backed the RV down the road and called it a night somewhere safer, somewhere with a ranger station within a mile. But instead, I stood there listening to the quiet, convincing myself the place was perfect, private, flat, and sheltered by a crescent of trees that felt like a natural amphitheater. My breath fogged as I walked the perimeter, boots crunching on a layer of leaves that felt thicker than they should have been. When I crouched down and brushed them aside, I saw the ground was disturbed, not like animals had been digging, but like something heavy had been dragged through the dirt. It crossed my mind that maybe a hunter had hauled a deer out of the valley. That would have been the rational thing to assume. But the tracks were wide, almost too wide, and they didn't follow a clear direction. Instead, they looped, hesitated, doubled back, like whatever left them wasn't sure where it wanted to go. By the time darkness fell, the forest had shifted moods. The air felt tight in my lungs, carrying a silence that wasn't natural. Even the insects had quieted. Nothing moved. Nothing called. It was the same kind of silence I'd heard once before, 10 years ago, right before a black bear wandered through my camp near Lake James. But this time, the silence didn't feel like fear from wildlife. It felt orchestrated. Inside the RV, I tried to settle in, made coffee, sat at the small table and wrote in the notebook I always carried. The words weren't coming out right, though. My thoughts kept drifting to the strange tracks outside, the heavy feeling in my chest, the way the wind seemed to pause between breaths as if listening. When I finally forced myself to lie down, I left the blinds cracked, something I never did. I told myself it was because the moonlight was nice, silvering the trees like frost. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to close off my view of the outside. I didn't like the idea of not seeing what was out there. Sleep slipped in slowly, pulling me under like deep water. I don't know how long I was out before the first sound reached me, a faint, deliberate crunch. Leaves, not blown by wind. Stepped on, one step, then another, slow, testing, heavy enough that the RV frame vibrated just slightly. I held my breath, straining to listen. At first, I told myself it was a deer, maybe even a bear, but something in the rhythm felt wrong. Too careful, too controlled. Wild animals move with instinct, not intention. Whatever was out there was taking its time, listening between footsteps, and it was moving around the RV in a slow arc. A cold sweat slid down my spine. I eased up from the mattress, moving so quietly I barely rustled the blanket. My heart hammered hard enough to shake in my ribs. The blinds by the small window above the kitchen counter were cracked just enough for me to peer through without disturbing them. Every muscle in my body locked as I leaned in, hoping, praying to see nothing. But I saw something. Not clearly, not enough to name, but enough to understand that it wasn't any animal I'd ever encountered in Appalachia. At first it looked like a shape in the dark, tall, narrow, hunched slightly like it was listening at the ground, or smelling it. Moonlight touched its outline for just a second, and I saw the suggestion of limbs that seemed too long for the torso they belonged to, and it moved with a smoothness that sent a wave of nausea through me. I blinked, hard, telling myself the darkness was tricking me, that shadows were playing against the trees. But then it straightened, slowly, the vertebrae stacking with an unnatural precision, and I felt its attention swing toward the RV. That was when I realized it hadn't been wandering randomly. It had been circling me. The crunch of leaves stopped, the air outside thickened, settling into a silence so heavy I could hear the faint throb of my pulse in my ears. I slowly backed away from the window, careful not to let the blinds move, careful not to make a sound. I tried to recall every bear protocol, every safety guideline ever drilled into my head, but none of them applied to a silhouette that moved like a person but bent like an animal. Then came the second sound. Not footsteps, not breathing. A tapping. 3 slow taps on the side of the RV. Knuckles or something like them. But too high, far above where a man could reach without climbing. I froze. Another set of taps, lighter this time, like whatever was out there was learning the texture of the metal's skin, testing it. Then a scrape, long and dragging, right along the thin sheet of aluminum near the window. My skin prickled so hard it hurt. I backed toward the bed, mind spinning through every explanation, pranksters, poachers, someone living off-grid who didn't appreciate visitors. But none of those sounded right. None of them could explain the way the taps seemed exploratory, curious in a way that felt fundamentally wrong, and none could explain the shape. I grabbed the only thing I had for protection, a heavy mag light. Not a weapon, but solid enough to buy time if something forced its way in. As I tightened my grip, another thought slipped into my mind, poisonous and quiet. What if it already knows you're awake? A soft thud sounded near the door like weight shifting. Then breathing. Slow, controlled breathing, not animal panting, not human exhaling, something in between, like an imitation that didn't fully understand what breath should sound like. My chest tightened until it hurt. And then silence, not fading, not stepping away, just gone, like the presence had been erased. I stood there, gripping the flashlight, staring at the door for what felt like an hour. Only when my legs began to tremble did I sink down onto the edge of the bed, muscles buzzing with adrenaline. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into a restless half-sleep, a state where every noise echoed too loudly and every shadow held shape. And when dawn finally crept through the blinds, weak and pale, I stepped outside to inspect the damage. I shouldn't have, because the first thing I saw was the mud smeared high on the RV's side, far higher than any person under 7 feet could reach. Finger marks. 4 long streaks like something had tested the surface, and beside them, another track in the leaves. Not a boot print, not a paw. Something split, wide, unfamiliar, and fresh. I crouched down slowly, careful not to disturb the edges of the print. The morning light was weak, barely cutting through the canopy, but even in the dimness, the track looked wrong. The split shape wasn't symmetrical like a deer's hoof, and it wasn't broad like a bear's pad. It was narrow at the back, widening toward the front, with 4 deep impressions where something like toes or claws had pressed into the soil. The strangest part was the depth. Whatever left it was heavy, very heavy. Wind rustled the trees overhead, making the branches sway with a dry, whispering sound that felt too close, too aware of me. I stood and stepped back, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement, but everything looked still. Suspiciously still. The forest seemed to be watching me again, the way it had last night, silent, patient, waiting. I don't know why I didn't pack up immediately. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the stubborn part of me that refused to be chased off by something I couldn't even identify. Or maybe it was denial, the same denial that had driven me into these mountains alone in the first place. I told myself I'd been tired, half dreaming, seeing shapes that weren't there. I told myself the track was from some animal I just didn't recognize. Logic, excuses, anything to drown out the memory of those taps along the RV's walls. I forced myself through the motions, brewing coffee, stepping outside to breathe the cold air, pretending everything was normal. My hands shook the whole time. By mid-morning, the sun had finally broken through in thin beams, warming patches of the clearing. The light helped. It gave me enough courage to walk the perimeter again. I wanted to see if there were more tracks, anything to give me a pattern, a direction. But as I moved through the leaves, I spotted something else instead, something that made my stomach clench so hard I nearly doubled over. On a birch tree at the far edge of the clearing, about 7 feet off the ground, were 3 gouges. Deep ones. Fresh. I stepped closer, running my fingers along the grooves. They weren't from a knife, not from a tool. These were made by something with force and precision, not the wild, chaotic marks you'd expect from a panicked animal. These were deliberate, almost even. Behind me, a branch snapped. I whipped around so fast I nearly fell, the maglite raised instinctively. But there was nothing there, just the trees, just the quiet, except not quiet. I heard something faint, a breath, a shift, a soft rustle. I wasn't sure, but it felt close, too close. The hairs on my neck stood up. For the first time in years, real fear seeped into my bones, cold and sharp, cutting through rational thought. Something was in those woods with me, something that didn't want to be seen. I didn't pack up completely, not yet, but I stopped pretending everything was fine. I kept the RV door open so I could reach it fast, and I stayed in the clearing where I had space to see movement. I checked the gas level. I moved my keys to the counter where I could grab them instantly. I positioned the RV so I'd have a straight shot down the gravel path if I needed to take off without looking back. Still, I didn't leave. Not yet. The day passed slowly, dragging like a long exhale. Every sound put me on edge. A squirrel sprinting across leaves sounded like footsteps. A gust of wind knocking pine needles loose made me spin and search the branches. For hours, nothing happened. No movement, no signs, nothing to confirm that last night had been real. By late afternoon, sunlight turned golden, filtering through the trees and softening the edges of everything. It should have made me feel better. It didn't, because the silence had returned. The same unnatural quiet I'd felt before the steps, before the taps. As if the forest had taken a breath and refused to let it out. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I scanned the tree line. My breath came too fast, forcing me to slow it down, grounding myself like I'd learned to after my brother died. "You're okay," I whispered under my breath. "You're okay. Nothing's here." The moment the words left my mouth, something answered. Not with a voice, with a knock. One single knock, hard, sharp, against a tree somewhere deep in the woods. I froze. Another knock. Closer. My skin crawled. I knew the sound of wood echoing through the mountains. It used to be a comforting reminder of other campers splitting logs. But this wasn't that. This was rhythmic. intentional, like someone was signaling. 3 knocks now, then silence, and then footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from the left side of the clearing. I took a step back toward the RV. The maglite held so tight my fingers ached. Branches parted, leaves shifted. Something was moving between the trees, but I couldn't see it clearly, just a shape slipping between shafts of light, too tall, too controlled in its movements. My pulse roared as I backed up faster. Then the shape stopped, dead still, watching me. I couldn't see its face, or maybe I didn't want to. My mind refused to make sense of it, as if acknowledging its shape would make all of this real in a way I wasn't ready for. A low creaking sound drifted from the woods, not a growl, not a human voice. More like the sound of bending wood, of something shifting its weight unnaturally. Then, with a smoothness that made my stomach drop, the shape crouched. A human could crouch, an animal could crouch. But nothing crouched the way it did, like its limbs folded at angles they shouldn't, like its knees bent too far, too easily. That broke me. I bolted for the RV. Leaves exploded under my boots as I sprinted across the clearing. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following. The air felt heavier behind me, like something was rising, standing, preparing to move. My lungs burned by the time I reached the door. I yanked it open, dove inside, slammed it shut, and locked it. For a moment, I stood there gripping the door handle, forehead pressed against the cool metal, chest heaving. The RV's silence wrapped around me like a thin shield. Too thin. Then something brushed against the door. Not scratching, not pounding. A soft, slow drag, as if fingertips or claws were tracing the outline of the frame. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the bed. The handle rattled once, gently, like something outside was testing its strength. My hands shook uncontrollably as I snatched the keys from the counter and hovered near the driver's seat. A thud hit the back of the RV near the rear window. Then another. Something was circling me again. I realized with a sinking dread that the RV wasn't protection. It was a cage the moment the sun went down. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, the footsteps faded. The dragging stopped. The woods fell silent once more. But I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat the entire night, gripping the steering wheel, watching the tree line through the windshield as the sky darkened and the shadows deepened. My mind replayed every sound, every shape, every impossible movement I'd seen. Part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined it all, hallucinated from stress and lack of sleep. But the mud on the RV's side, the gouges in the tree, the track in the leaves, those were real, and so was the tapping. When the moon rose high enough that its light washed over the clearing, something shifted behind the trees. A silhouette, tall, motionless, watching. It stayed there for hours. And something inside me, some instinct older than language, finally whispered the truth. This thing wasn't just curious. It was waiting for me to step outside, for the RV to fail, for me to make a mistake. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here another night. I waited for dawn like a man waits for a verdict, watching the slow bruising of the sky turn from black to navy to the faintest gray. The silhouette in the tree line didn't move. It just stayed there, as though it had rooted itself into the ground. Every few minutes I'd blink hard to make sure it wasn't my mind inventing shapes, but each time my eyes opened it was still there, tall, narrow, slightly bent at the waist, like it was leaning in to study me through the windshield. When that first blade of sunlight cut through the trees, the shape faded, not stepping away, not walking off, just dissolving into the brightness until only empty forest remained. My breath released in one tight, painful rush. I'd never seen anything vanish like that. Not run, not flee, just disappear. I didn't waste time. I turned the key, hands trembling. The RV sputtered for a second, long enough for panic to spike. Then the engine caught and rumbled to life. I didn't even bother putting on my boots. I shoved the RV into drive and rolled forward, glancing repeatedly at the side mirrors, expecting to see something bolting after me through the trees. For the first half mile, the road was silent except for gravel popping under the tires. Fog hung low, weaving through the trunks like slow-moving specters. The forest on either side pressed in tight, closer than I remembered, like the trees had grown inward during the night. Each time the road curved, the RV's frame groaned, and my heartbeat jumped into my throat. I kept telling myself I was minutes from safety, that once I hit the main road, everything would feel normal again. But the mountains don't give up their grip easily, and sometimes they don't let you go at all. 2 minutes into the drive, I hit the first obstacle. A fallen tree blocked the road, a massive one. Fresh, bark stripped in long vertical lines. No rot, no storm damage, just a clean break, like something had exerted force from the wrong angle. It lay across the gravel path like a deliberate barricade. My stomach twisted. I shifted into reverse immediately, backing up until I could turn around in a small alcove of flattened leaves. As I did, something caught my eye, far in the woods, barely visible through the haze. A dark shape, still, upright, watching. I swung the RV around so fast I almost hit a stump. Then I floored it back toward the clearing, desperate for any path, any exit, even if it meant carving a new one through brush. Anything to get out. But when I reached the clearing again, I stopped cold. The tracks were gone. Not covered. Gone. The thick layer of leaves I'd walked on yesterday, disturbed, scattered, now looked untouched, smoothed over as if someone had raked them carefully into place, as if the forest were erasing any evidence that something had been here. A cold sweat broke across my back. I didn't know which way to go. The GPS showed nothing but unmarked green. No ranger station, no alternate roads, just wilderness. The RV idled beneath me like a restless animal, engine rumbling while the trees loomed in a silent semicircle. Then, faint, almost lost in the hum of the engine, I heard it again. Knock. Once, somewhere far off. Then another. Closer. My throat tightened. Those knocks weren't echoes. They weren't woodpeckers. They were signals, calls, and something was answering. I threw the RV into drive and turned down a narrow side path I hadn't noticed before, little more than a pair of old tire ruts half swallowed by weeds. It angled downhill, steep and slick with dew, but I didn't care. All I knew was staying in that clearing meant dying in that clearing. The RV lurched and slid as the slope tightened. Branches scraped the sides like fingernails. At one point, the wheels spun, struggling for traction, and I slammed my foot on the pedal, heart pounding. The RV finally surged forward with a violent jolt that rattled every dish, every cabinet door. For a moment, the trees thinned. That was when I saw it. Not directly, out of the corner of my right mirror. A tall shape running parallel to me through the forest, running fast, too fast. Its limbs moved with an impossible angle, long strides eating distance like it weighed nothing. It stayed just inside the shadows, its outline flickering between the trunks. Every time the RV bounced over a rut and the mirror blurred, the shape seemed closer when it came back into focus. My breath came in broken gasps. Every instinct in me screamed to look away, to pretend I didn't see it. But I couldn't. Then it changed course. It began angling toward the road, toward me. No, my voice cracked. I hit the gas hard enough the RV fishtailed. The path curved sharply to the left, climbing back uphill. The engine strained, branches slapped the windshield. I leaned forward in my seat as if my body could somehow make the RV faster. The shape kept pace. Another curve, this one narrower, tighter, like the mountain wanted to squeeze the RV into stopping. I yanked the wheel, tires skidding on loose gravel. The RV lurched violently, and for a terrifying second I felt the whole vehicle tip, but it landed back on all four wheels. And then the forest opened. I saw a strip of dirt, brighter than the rest, then a wooden sign. Faded. Barely legible. Service Road 19, no public maintenance. I didn't care. Maintained or not, it was a way out. I turned onto it so sharply the back of the RV swung out and clipped a stand of saplings. The whole frame shuddered. Something metallic clattered to the floor behind me, but I kept my foot to the floor. The path straightened, widened. I could see sunlight filtering through the end of the trees, clear sky beyond, open land, freedom. And that was when the scream hit. A sound so sharp and high it wasn't human, not animal. Something stretched thin and wrong, rising in pitch until my ears rang. It echoed through the forest with a violence that made the windshield vibrate. I didn't want to look. I didn't, but I glanced into the mirror and saw it standing in the road behind me. Tall, too tall. Its limbs bent and poised like it was considering whether to sprint after me or simply watch. The sunlight hit it just enough to reveal hints of texture, skin or something like it, stretched over angles that didn't belong in any creature born on this earth. Its head tilted, slow and unnatural, as if it were memorizing me. Then it stepped back, not into the trees. Up, it climbed the trunk like an insect, too fast, too smooth, and vanished into the canopy. I slammed the gas pedal until my foot hurt. The RV roared forward, bouncing hard over ruts, the road blurring beneath me. Branches whipped overhead in flashes of green and shadow. Within seconds, the forest broke open into a small valley. Sunlight flooded the windshield. The scream didn't follow. The knocks didn't echo. The trees grew quiet behind me, returning to their ordinary stillness as if nothing had ever happened. But something in me knew better. I didn't stop driving until I hit a paved road, miles later, where cell service returned in one thin, flickering bar. I pulled over, shaking so badly the keys rattled in the ignition. Cars passed occasionally. Normal cars, normal people. People who had no idea what lived a few ridgelines west. I sat there for a long time, staring at the tree line across the road, waiting for a shadow to move. Nothing did. But that didn't settle me. Not then. Not now. Because part of me still feels those mountains watching. Part of me still hears those deliberate knocks on the RV wall whenever I close my eyes. And part of me knows that whatever followed me through those woods wasn't wandering aimlessly. It was studying me, choosing me. And the worst part, the part I never tell anyone, is this. Sometimes at night, when everything is quiet and the world feels still, I hear a tap. Soft, slow, right along the side of my home, as if something tall is checking to see if I'm awake. When that first tap echoed through the siding of my home, months after I'd fled those mountains, I didn't move. Not an inch. I remember sitting in my living room, the lamp casting a warm cone of light across the carpet, my coffee still steaming, the TV murmuring some late-night rerun I wasn't really watching. Life was supposed to be normal again, predictable. Safe, houses were supposed to be walls, barriers, protection. But when that soft knock came, 3 slow taps like the ones on the RV, I felt the same cold pressure fill my chest, the same hollow dread that had chased me down that mountainside. I held my breath for a long time, listening for footsteps, for dragging, for anything. For the next sound in a sequence I hoped would never come. Nothing followed. After a few minutes, I forced myself to go to the window. Rational thought insisted it had been a branch, a blown object, a settling noise, anything but the thing that had watched me from the tree line, anything but the shape that had run beside my RV with impossible speed. But as I stood at the window, looking out into my quiet street lit by a single flickering lamppost, I felt my skin prickle with the same instinct I'd tried to bury. The street was empty, still. Too still for a place where you normally heard dogs barking or distant voices or the hum of someone's TV slipping through thin walls. That was the first night the fear found me again. And it didn't stop there. It returned in small ways. A shape I could have sworn I saw near the edge of my yard. Footsteps in the leaves when no one was outside. The sensation, heavy and ancient, that I was being observed from just beyond the reach of the porch light. I told myself these were echoes of trauma, hallucinations carved from memory, a mind trying to make sense of something it couldn't explain. That's what grief does. It loosens the hinges of reality just enough to let shadows slip through. But the truth was simpler. Something had followed me, or worse, something had chosen me. And the reason I believe that has nothing to do with sightings or taps or nightmares. It has to do with what I found 2 weeks after coming home. I was cleaning out the RV. I'd avoided it as long as I could, letting dust settle across the dashboard, letting leaves gather beneath the tires. Even seeing it parked in my driveway sent a ripple of unease through me. But one Saturday morning, I decided it was time. I couldn't keep living in fear of a vehicle. I opened the door slowly, waiting for a smell. Mud, rot, anything that might have seeped in. But the inside was clean. Ordinary. Empty in a way that should have calmed me. It didn't, because when I walked to the back, kneeling to pick up a fallen frying pan from the floor, I saw something on the underside of the rear window. Faint, barely visible, but unmistakable. Mud. 4 streaks of it. High. Too high for me or anyone of normal height to have touched from the outside without a ladder. I sat on the RV floor for nearly 10 minutes, just staring at those streaks, trying to convince myself they were remnants from the Appalachia trip, something I'd missed when I first inspected the RV after escaping. But the mud hadn't been dry. It had smudged when I touched it, soft and damp like it had been placed there recently. Something had been outside my house. Something had stood at that window, and it had touched the glass. After that, something in me broke, not in the sense of collapsing, but in the sense of bending past its limit, like a bone that has carried too much weight for too long. Denial, suspicion, rationalization, all of it fell away. I finally accepted what my instincts had been screaming at me since the moment I saw that thing crouched in the clearing. This wasn't random. Whatever lived in those woods didn't just watch wanderers for sport. It watched for reasons. It studied. It learned. And it doesn't stay in one place. People think the Appalachians hold secrets because of isolation, because of legends, because of deep hollers where sunlight rarely reaches. But the truth I learned the hard way is that the mountains don't keep things in. They keep things out. Things that move beyond them. Things that can cross ridgelines, valleys, counties, states, things that can remember. And maybe this thing remembered me. I tried to move on with my life. I returned to work. I kept conversations with friends light, telling no one what I'd seen. I tried to sleep at normal hours, though my dreams twisted through forests I'd never step foot in again. On good days, I could almost convince myself the creature had lost interest, that I was just one of many passing distractions. But some nights, the tapping returns. Always faint, always at the far corner of my house, like it's reminding me that it knows where I sleep. Once, I heard it on the roof, light footsteps crossing the shingles in a pattern too measured to be raccoons. And then came the night I woke to something worse. Not knocking, not scraping, whistling. A low, wavering whistle that rose slowly, then dipped, mimicking the exact cadence of the wind through the birch trees in that clearing. Except the wind wasn't blowing. My windows were shut. There was no breeze at all. It was close, right outside my bedroom wall. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. My mind raced back to the forest, to the way the creature had shifted its weight, the way its head tilted while watching me. That whistle, whatever attempted imitation it was, felt wrong in every conceivable way, like it had heard a human whistle once and was trying to replicate it without understanding melody or breath. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours. Then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't sleep the next one either. Eventually, I moved to a different house, 3 towns over. I told myself it was a fresh start, but deep down I knew what it really was, an attempt to outrun something that didn't need roads or logic or distance to follow. And for a while, it worked. No taps, no whistling, no shadows at the edge of the yard. I started to believe I'd finally escaped. Maybe it had lost interest. Maybe distance did matter. Until last week. I was walking my dog at dusk, not far, just around the end of my driveway. The sky was dimming, turning that bruised gray-blue color that always reminds me of those mountains. The street was quiet, except for a few cicadas buzzing in the trees. Then the dog froze. His ears pricked forward, body stiffening. A low growl vibrated through his chest. He stared across the road toward the tree line, an unlit patch of pines where the evening shadows pooled like dark water. I followed his gaze. At first I saw nothing. Then, slowly, as if it had been standing there the entire time, a shape leaned out from behind one of the pines. Tall. Too tall. Its outline thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted the same way it had tilted that night from the clearing. Just watching me. A car turned the corner then, headlights sweeping across the road. When the light hit the tree line, the shape pulled back, smoothly, almost melting into the shadows. Gone. My dog whimpered, and that's when the fear finally turned into something else, something deeper. Not panic, not dread, resolve. A strange, painful understanding. I cannot outrun what follows without reason. I cannot hide from what memorizes the sound of my breath. And I cannot pretend that the Appalachia I loved isn't guarding something older than any of us, something that doesn't always stay within its boundaries. So if you're hearing my story and you're tempted by the promise of solitude in those mountains, if you're packing up your RV, eager for quiet roads and deep forests and the kind of silence that feels sacred, then listen to me carefully. Silence is not always emptiness. Stillness is not always peace. And some things in the remote stretches of Appalachia are not meant to be encountered alone. If you ever find yourself camping where the woods fall silent too quickly, where the wildlife seems to vanish, where the air feels thick enough to choke on, where the trees seem to lean in as if listening, leave. Don't wait for footsteps. Don't wait for tapping. Don't wait for curiosity to turn into recognition. Because once something out there notices you, once it follows you, once it studies the way you breathe and move in fear, it doesn't forget. And if it chooses you, it will always know where to find you. I've learned that fear doesn't always start with a roar. Sometimes it begins with something quiet, an off note in the night air, a feeling that the world around you has tilted just a little, just enough for your instincts to whisper, "Pay attention." My name is Michael Renner. I was 43 at the time. And back in June of 2019, I thought I had seen enough of the outdoors to know my way around danger. I grew up in the Iron Range of Minnesota, not far from Lake Vermilion itself. I hunted my first deer in those woods. I camped alone by the shoreline when I was 16 and believed that made me fearless. But age has a way of humbling you, of showing you that the world you think you understand still holds corners where something ancient might linger, something patient, something watching. That June, my wife, Carly, and our daughter, Emma, who was 9 back then, decided to take a 4-night RV trip to Lake Vermilion campground. We had a small Volkswagen Westfalia, old but solid, a little rusty around the edges, but trustworthy in all the ways that felt important. Vermilion had always been a place of memories for me, and I wanted to pass that sense of familiarity, maybe even that sense of safety, on to them. Looking back, I think that desire blinded me. We arrived on a Friday evening, the sun stretching long golden rays across the water. The lake was calm enough to reflect the sky perfectly like a sheet of glass. The campground was busy but not crowded, early season with families trickling in for the summer. Our site sat at the tree line 30 yards from the water with a cluster of Norway pines behind us that leaned slightly as if bending toward the lake. I remember liking that sway, that quiet shushing sound of needles brushing against each other. At the time, it felt soothing. Now I realize that when night fell, that same sound twisted into something else, something colder. The first night was fine, uneventful, the way a first night should be. We grilled burgers, played cards inside the Westfalia when the temperature dropped, and listened to loons calling across the lake. Their calls echoed just right, melancholic but comforting, the way loons usually sound. I fell asleep thinking the trip would be an easy one. Simple. Familiar. The second night cracked that expectation. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside. Soft ones. Not boots. Not heavy, but deliberate. At first, I chalked it up to a deer or maybe a raccoon nosing around the fire pit. I didn't open the blinds. I didn't sit up. I didn't even breathe deeply. I just lay there and listened, the way you do when you decide a sound isn't a threat, but your body doesn't quite believe you. Then the footsteps stopped, right beside the van. I heard a light, almost curious tapping on the sliding door, metal touched by fingertips. Tap, tap, tap. My breath went shallow. Something felt wrong about it, something too gentle, too intentional. Wild animals don't tap with a rhythm. They scrape, they shuffle, they snort. This was human. I sat up quietly, ready to peek through the curtain. Before I could move it aside, Carly, half awake, grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she whispered. "Just listen first." She was right. Sometimes it's better to stay invisible. The tapping continued for another 10 seconds, soft but steady, like whoever or whatever was outside was trying to test the metal, test our awareness, test us. Then the steps drifted away, slow and unhurried, crunching over dry pine needles, fading into the woods. I stayed awake the rest of the night. In the morning, I walked around the RV expecting to find tracks, but the ground was messy with footprints from other campers. Nothing stood out. I tried to convince myself that someone had gotten lost coming back from the toilets or had one too many beers. It made sense, logical, normal. But logic has a short lifespan in the wilderness. The third day was brighter. We rented a canoe and paddled out to a small island where the rocks held enough heat to warm our hands. Emma searched for strange-shaped stones and declared each one a treasure worth keeping. I wanted that sliver of normalcy to stretch out forever. Her laughter skipping over the water, my wife soaking in the sun, the world feeling simple again. But even then, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the wind kept shifting directions, or the way the trees on shore leaned toward us as if straining to hear our conversations. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something I couldn't name, lurking just outside the edges of awareness. By evening, clouds rolled in, heavy ones, thick with humidity and the promise of a storm. We settled inside the RV early, listening to droplets tap the roof, the wind growing impatient in the pines. The campground went quiet faster than usual. People zipped up tents, shut RV doors, and hunkered down. By 10, the world outside felt muffled, as though wrapped in wool. Then it began again. At first, I didn't hear footsteps. I heard breathing. Slow, wet, raspy, right beside the van. The kind of breathing that doesn't belong to something four-legged. I froze. My first thought, God help me, was that maybe someone needed help. But the longer I listened, the more I knew this breathing didn't belong to someone confused or lost. It sounded hungry. Carly sat up, eyes already wide, as if she'd been awake the whole time. "You hear it too?" I nodded. This time, the curtain didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a flimsy suggestion, like whatever was outside already knew exactly where we were, already knew what we looked like, how many of us there were. Then, a sound, a whisper. Not words, not anything with shape, more like a low, vibrating hiss, drawn out as if testing the air the moment the space between us and it. I felt my skin crawl, every hair on my arm stood up. My instincts screamed to grab the flashlight and look. My rational mind told me to stay put, and beneath all of that, deeper than fear, something older whispered inside me, an instinct I hadn't felt since being a teenager alone in those woods. Do not let it see your eyes. That thought alone felt like it wasn't mine, like it came from something ancient inside my bones. The breathing grew louder, closer. Then another sound, a scrape, across the metal of the van, slow, deliberate, almost affectionate. Emma stirred in her sleep. Carly clamped a hand over her mouth to keep her from calling out. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Then a scream, not from us, not from inside, from somewhere deep in the woods, high, sharp, and echoing through the trees. The breathing outside our van stopped instantly. Another scream tore through the night. Louder, closer, violent enough to rattle the windows. This one sounded human, but distorted, like someone trying to scream with a mouth that couldn't quite shape the sound right. We sat frozen, waiting for footsteps, for movement, for anything. But all we heard was silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Then something ran, not toward us, away, fast, crashing through the undergrowth with an animal's speed and a human's weight, the kind of movement you feel in your chest, not just your ears. I counted the seconds until the sound faded. 10, 20, 30. Carly whispered, "What was that?" I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. And even if I had, I wouldn't have spoken it out loud. Not with the air still thick, not with the trees still listening. We stayed awake the rest of the night, waiting for another scream, another breath, another scrape of metal. Nothing came. But sometimes silence feels more threatening than noise. By dawn, my hands were still shaking, and the woods outside our RV felt like they were holding something back, something waiting for nightfall to rise again. By the time the first gray light seeped through the treetops, my nerves felt stretched thin, like a frayed rope ready to snap. Dawn usually softens the woods around Lake Vermilion, turns the fog gold, warms the shadows, smooths the edges of fear. But that morning, the light felt wrong, weak, pale, as if the night had drained something from it. I stepped out of the RV slowly, careful not to wake Emma. The damp air hit me first, thick with the smell of wet earth and pine pitch. The ground soaked up my footsteps, muffling them, and for a moment I felt as though I were the only person awake in the entire campground. Then I noticed something. The woods were silent. Not quiet. Silent. No birds, no insects, no breeze moving through the pines. Silence so complete it pressed against my ears, like pressure. Carly joined me, wrapping her arms around herself even though the morning wasn't cold. "Michael," she whispered, "do you notice?" I nodded. "Yeah." It felt like the woods were listening again. I walked around the Volkswagen, half dreading what I might find. Scratches should have been there, long ones across the sliding door where that thing had dragged something sharp, something deliberate. But the metal was clean, completely clean, too clean, as if something had wiped it down. A small shiver crawled up my spine. Carly scanned the tree line. "Do you think someone was messing with us? Some drunk kid?" But the question didn't even sound sincere. She knew as well as I did that what we had heard in the night didn't walk like a drunk teenager, didn't breathe like one, and no intoxicated prankster leaves no trace behind. Before I could answer, a rustling sound cut through the silence. We both froze, every muscle turning stiff. But it wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from another campsite. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then I saw movement. Another camper stepping out of a large white RV across from us. A middle-aged man, heavy-set, wearing a fishing cap and worn-out flannel pajama pants. He yawned loudly and stretched his arms toward the sky. Everything about him felt ordinary, grounding, normal enough that I almost felt relief. Then he looked at me and his expression shifted, just slightly but enough to catch. His eyes narrowed. "You hear something last night?" he asked. No greeting, no warm-up, just a question thrown into the morning air like a stone. My stomach tightened. "Yeah, did you?" He hesitated before answering. "Yeah, something screaming, I think." He scratched the back of his neck, sounded like it came from deep in the woods. Carly spoke before I could. "Did you see anything? Anyone walking around?" "No." He shook his head. "But my wife, she said she heard breathing outside the door." My blood went cold. He pointed down the row of campsites. Couple folks packed up and left before sunrise, didn't talk to anyone, just got in their trucks and took off. That wasn't normal. Campers don't leave at 4 a.m. without coffee, without noise, without at least a muttered complaint. That's when I noticed something else. 2 empty campsites, both with fresh tire tracks, both abandoned in a hurry. Food left out. Chairs knocked over. One tent collapsed in on itself. I didn't like the implications. We made breakfast inside the RV, keeping the windows cracked but the curtains mostly closed. Emma ate her pancakes like nothing had happened, humming softly to herself. I envied her innocence, her ability to compartmentalize. Children do that. Fear slips off them like water. Adults absorb it. Around noon, the sun finally burned off the morning haze. Birds returned in small scattered calls, hesitant at first, then bolder. It gave the illusion of safety, like the forest tried to pretend nothing had happened. We tried to go about the day normally from the dock, walked a short trail, let Emma throw stones into the lake. But underneath every moment was that growing awareness that the woods weren't done with us. Every time a branch snapped or a crow cawed, Carly flinched. Every time wind brushed the back of my neck, I turned around expecting to see someone standing behind me. The worst part was how normal everything looked. Sometimes terror wears the face of calm. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather again, thin wisps at first, then long gray sheets curling like smoke across the sky. The temperature dropped, and the lake darkened to a deep shade of steel. We returned to the RV early, all of us a little on edge, though none of us said it aloud. The campground had thinned even more. The man in the flannel had left mid-afternoon. Another site sat empty now. The spaces between the RVs felt wider, lonelier. As the evening settled in, Carly suggested we sleep at a motel instead. I wanted to agree. God, I wanted to. But the nearest town was a 40-minute drive, and the storm clouds rolling in looked ready to dump rain, so thick visibility would be a joke. Navigating those winding roads in pitch dark didn't feel safer than staying put. So we stayed. But as night approached, something in the atmosphere changed. A subtle shift, like the air grew heavier, thicker, more crowded. I could feel it in my chest, like something was pushing back with every breath I took. At dusk, a ranger truck drove slowly through the grounds. I stepped outside as he passed. He rolled down his window. "Everything all right over here?" he asked, scanning my face like he expected something unusual. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked. He hesitated. His gaze flicked toward the woods. Some campers reported noises, probably coyotes. Coyotes don't tap on metal doors. They don't breathe like that. And they sure as hell don't run on two legs that sound like 180 pounds hitting the forest floor. "Look," he added, lowering his voice, "if you have any trouble tonight, any at all, call the main office. Radio's on all night." Something in his tone, tight, rehearsed, told me he knew more than he was saying. When he drove off, the sense of unease settled deeper, as if the woods had just been waiting for him to leave. Night landed quickly, without transition, like someone flipped a switch. One moment we could see the line of trees. The next, they vanished into darkness. Inside the RV, the air grew stuffy despite the open-top vent. Emma drifted to sleep within an hour. Carly leaned against me, quiet, her fingers curled in the fabric of my shirt like she was afraid of letting go. Around 11:30, wind rose from the lake, soft at first, then building into long wails that threaded through the branches above us. The pines swayed harder than they had the night before, creaking like old bones. Then came the smell. A damp, rotting scent seeped in through the windows. Not skunk, not dead fish. It smelled like soil overturned after a long burial, like something old pulled up from deep underground. Carly stiffened beside me. "Do you smell that?" I nodded. It grew stronger. Thick, wet, suffocating, the kind of smell that clings to the back of your throat. Then the breathing came back. Not outside the door this time. Not near the window, but somewhere just beyond the tree line. Long, dragging inhalations. Heavy exhalations. As if something enormous was learning how to breathe through a human mouth. The hairs on my arms stood straight. I crawled forward, slow as I could, and peeked through the narrowest sliver of curtain. At first I saw nothing, just darkness and the faint shimmer of the lake beyond the trees. Then a shape shifted. Tall. Too tall. It moved between the trunks with a kind of unsettling grace, bending at the waist as though sniffing the ground, then straightening, its silhouette stretching upward like a shadow trying to escape its own body. My heartbeat pounded so loudly I thought it would give us away. The shape paused, turned, and for the briefest moment, I swear it looked directly toward the RV. The breathing stopped. The woods went silent again. Then, a scream shattered the night. But this time it wasn't human. It was deeper, violent, primordial, and it was close, very close. I jerked the curtain shut, grabbed Carly's hand and whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't move." The thing outside had gone silent, but silence didn't mean safety. Silence meant it was hunting. Silence has weight. It presses into the cracks of your mind, settles into your ribs, and whispers that something is about to break. When that scream ripped across the campground and then everything went dead still, I felt that weight lock into place, like the night itself was holding its breath. Inside the RV, every second felt stretched thin. Carly squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. Emma shifted in her sleep, murmuring something soft and innocent that didn't belong in a moment like this. I whispered, barely audible, "Don't wake her, not yet." Outside, the forest felt alive with waiting. The scrape of branches, the distant rush of wind, those sounds had vanished. Even the waves on the lake were still, as if something had pressed its palm against the water and told it to be quiet. Then I heard it, a single footstep. Not close, not right against the van this time, but heavy, too heavy for a deer, too slow for a wolf. One step, then another, each one separated by an unnatural, deliberate pause, like whatever was out there was choosing exactly how to move, exactly how much noise to make. Carly mouthed, "What is that?" I shook my head. I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. The footsteps grew closer, but not directly approaching. More like circling, testing the perimeter of the campground, weaving between trees with a predatory patience that made my skin crawl. It moved with the eerie rhythm of something imitating a human gait, but pulled from a body not made for it. A branch snapped, sharp enough to ricochet through the quiet. I flinched. Carly covered her mouth with her sleeve to muffle a gasp. Then came a new sound, low, rumbling, almost questioning, like the creature was trying out its own voice, adjusting the pitch, tasting the resonance of the noise inside its throat. My mind reached for logic, for explanation. Moose? But moose don't scream like that. Bears? Bears move with more huffing, more snorting, and nothing in Minnesota stands tall enough to cast the shadow I saw earlier, that elongated silhouette drifting between tree trunks like a tall figure bending at joints that weren't meant to bend. I stayed perfectly still, eyes locked on the curtained window closest to the tree line. The creature's sounds faded, then reappeared, closer but no clearer. I realized I couldn't tell if it was 10 feet away or 50. The darkness warped sound, twisted it around the campground like it was playing tricks on us. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 30. Time stretched and folded like rubber. Then another scream. This one was different, shorter. A kind of broken cry that ended with a sharp choke. It came from deeper in the woods, east of the campground. I felt my stomach twist. There were tents in that direction. A family with 2 boys. I'd watched them roast marshmallows the previous evening. Carly looked at me, eyes wide with horror. "Michael, was that?" "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know." A faint voice carried through the trees. At first I thought it was wind, but it had rhythm, emotion, panic. A man shouting. It was muffled, distant, but unmistakable. "Hey, over here!" Stop! His words cut off abruptly. A thud followed. Heavy. Final. Final. Carly's hand flew to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "We need to call the ranger," barely controlling her voice. I grabbed the radio number card from the dashboard and fumbled for my phone. No signal. Not even one bar. I cursed under my breath and looked toward the ranger station through the windshield. The path was dark. Dark in a way that felt unnatural, like the air itself swallowed the faint glow of the campground lamps. "We can't go out there," Carly whispered, shaking her head. "Not while that thing is out." I knew she was right. Still, my instincts fought each other, one pushing me toward action, the other dragging me back with a cold hand around my spine. Then came another sound, one I will never forget. Knocking, slow, rhythmic, on someone else's RV. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks. Not ours, but close. Too close. I crawled to the opposite window, lifted the curtain a fraction of an inch, and looked out through the sliver of glass. I saw the silhouette of the big fifth-wheel camper 2 sites over. Something tall stood beside it. Its arm, longer than it should have been, hung limp at its side except when it slowly raised it and tapped the metal door with its knuckles. Tap, tap, tap. The door rattled. Someone inside whispered frantically. The creature leaned closer, its head tilted at an angle no human neck could achieve. The tapping stopped. A low inhale, long, shuddering, came from its distorted chest. Then, in a voice that mimicked human cadence but not human sound, it whispered something. My blood froze. I couldn't make out the words, if they were words. It sounded like breath forced through the shape of speech, mocking, wrong, practiced but imperfect. Then it did something that made every hair on my body stand up. It repeated the whisper in a different tone, higher, softer, like it was imitating the voice of a woman, then a child's voice, then another. Voices that didn't belong to any of us. Carly whispered, Michael, what is it doing? I swallowed hard. I think it's trying to figure out how to sound like us. The creature lifted its head suddenly as if sensing movement. It turned sharply, too sharply, and scanned the dark. Then its body twitched, jerking in small movements like muscles pulling in the wrong order. And then it dropped to all fours. Not like a bear. Not like a wolf. Like something breaking itself down into a shape that didn't fit, joints cracking quietly as it lowered to the ground. Its posture was wrong, too elongated, too bendable. It crawled under the camper with a fluidity that made my stomach churn. A scream erupted from inside the RV it had approached. High, terrified. The creature reacted instantly, lurching out from the opposite side of the camper and sprinting toward the woods with an inhuman burst of speed. Branches snapped in its wake. The ground trembled. Then, silence again. But this silence was different. Heavier. Final. Carly stared at me, tears streaking her cheeks. We have to leave. Tonight. Right now. We can't, I said, though the words barely made it out. If we drive, the headlights will give us away, the engine noise. What? Staying is worse, she insisted. We're sitting targets. I looked at Emma asleep on the bench seat, oblivious to the nightmare brewing around us. My mind raced. Leave or stay, move or hide. Survival demanded a choice, and every option carried its own kind of danger. Before I could speak, a new sound drifted through the trees. Voices, but not human voices. Multiple, layered, echoing, overlapping tones, high, low, childlike, elderly, all speaking the same thing, the same pattern, the same mocking cadence, tap, 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 like a chorus of imitations. Carly's nails dug into my arm. It's not just one, she whispered. Michael, there's more than one. The air thickened, the temperature dropping sharply as the voices multiplied. Some seemed feet away, some deeper in the woods, some drifting across the lake like echoes from another world. They repeated again. Tap, 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 like they were calling to each other or calling to us. I knew then that something ancient lived in those woods, something territorial, something intelligent, something learning, and night was nowhere near over. Fear does strange things to time. It stretches a minute into an hour, a breath into an eternity. As those echoing voices rolled through the trees, those impossible, layered imitations of human tones, I felt the night closing in on us, folding around the RV like a fist curling inward. Inside the Westphalia, it was suddenly too small, too fragile, a thin metal shell against something we didn't understand. I felt every vibration of the night through the van's frame, the distant cracking of branches, the shifting of something heavy moving across damp soil, the faint thrum of footsteps that seemed to multiply, splitting off in different directions like wolves hunting as a pack. Except these weren't wolves. Wolves don't mimic voices. Carly pressed her back to the refrigerator cabinet, her breath shallow. Michael, they're getting closer. I didn't answer. My ears were locked onto the sound of soft footfalls moving between campsites. Not loud, not overt, almost exploratory. Curious. Then, again, that triple tap echoing faintly from at least 3 different directions. Tap, tap, tap. A call and response, like a code. Emma stirred, not waking fully, but shifting enough that the blankets rustled. The tiniest sound, but in the suffocating stillness, it felt like a flare. Instantly, one set of footsteps stopped. Frozen. Listening. My heart slammed into my ribs so hard I felt it in my throat. I crawled forward and put my hand gently over Emma's shoulder, steadying her. She calmed again, her breathing returning to the slow rhythm of sleep. But outside, something had heard. A rustle. A shift. Something standing taller. Then, a hand pressed against the side of the RV. Flat. Wide. The metal dented inward with the weight. Carly's hand flew to her mouth. My breath hitched in my chest. The hand slid slowly downward along the panel, dragging long fingers, too long, too flexible. They curled slightly, testing the strength of the metal, scraping lightly, deliberately. I could feel the vibrations beneath my palm on the inside wall. Then, in a whisper so soft I first thought it came from inside the van, a voice drifted from just outside the door. Hello. The pitch was wrong. Too high for an adult, too smooth for a child. The tone wavered, as though the creature was tasting the shape of the word, experimenting with the sound. It was the kind of voice I might have laughed at in daylight, something silly, awkward, almost cartoonish. But in the dark, it was paralyzing. Another voice joined in from deeper in the woods, lower, rougher. Hello. A third from behind our RV, then a fourth, all mimicking the same distorted greeting, each one slightly off, slightly broken. It was like listening to 100 versions of the same word played on warped vinyl. A metallic clang echoed across the grounds. Something, one of them, knocked over a grill. Then another sound. Thuds, heavy ones, like bodies dropping to all fours. Something ran past our RV so close that the ground quivered beneath it. Emma woke with a gasp. Daddy? I put my finger to her lips instantly. Shh! Listen to me. You can't make a sound, sweetheart. Not one. Her eyes widened with fear, but she nodded, curling into Carly's arms. Outside, something sniffed at the back window, long, slow inhalations that fogged the glass from the outside. The fog spread in circles, then smudged, as though something pressed its face directly against the pane. A soft thump on the roof made all three of us flinch. Then another. Something was climbing. No. Many somethings. The roof creaked under shifting weight. I could hear small impacts, fingertips drumming lightly, testing the fiberglass, then long drags like nails scraping gently across the surface. Not enough to puncture, just enough to frighten. A low chittering noise started, like clicking tongue sounds mixed with wet breathing. More of them answered from the ground below. The chorus built, uneven and unnerving, bouncing between the trees until it felt like the whole forest was speaking in a language that didn't belong anywhere on Earth. Carly whispered, voice trembling, "We can't survive this just sitting here." I stared at the dashboard, at the keys, at the black windshield reflecting our terrified faces. Drive? Through a swarm of these things, with headlights that would draw them, with engine noise that would carry through the trees like a beacon? Yet staying meant waiting for one of them to finally test the windows, to decide the metal door was worth the effort, to peel back the thin skin of the van like a fruit. My mind raced. "All right," I whispered. "We wait for them to move further away. If there's a break, any break, we go. Fast, quiet as possible at first, then we gun it." Carly nodded, her grip tightening around Emma. Then the night shifted again. A scream tore across the lake, farther away this time. But not human, not animal. A call, a warning, a command. Everything outside the RV froze. The footsteps, the tapping, the chittering, all of it stopped mid-motion. A few seconds stretched out like a held breath. Then, one by one, they responded. Not with screams, not with words, with clicks, soft at first, then louder, then harmonizing into a rhythm that didn't feel random at all, patterned, synchronized, like some kind of territorial signal. They were communicating, and something was calling them back. The weight on the roof shifted, then disappeared entirely with a suddenness that made the van rock slightly. I heard multiple bodies landing softly on the ground outside, some heavier, some lighter. Branches rustled, underbrush snapped, feet, too many to count, moved deeper into the forest in quick, purposeful strides. Within 20 seconds, the campground felt empty again, but not safe, because the silence had returned. The same heavy silence from dawn. The same unnatural stillness that preceded everything awful that had happened. Carly leaned in close. "Now, Michael. Now. If we're going, we go now." She was right. I grabbed the keys with shaking hands, crawling into the driver's seat. My fingers slipped over the metal twice before I managed to fit them into the ignition. I hesitated, not out of doubt but pure instinct. The kind of instinct that had once kept my teenage self alive on hunting trips in these same woods. If I turned the engine over too hard, they might hear. But not turning it meant staying, dying. I swallowed hard, whispered a prayer I hadn't said in years, and turned the key just enough to engage the battery. The dashboard lit in a soft glow. No headlights, no engine, not yet. Carly held Emma tight. "It's okay, baby, it's okay. Just stay quiet." Emma's small hand clutched her mother's sleeve so tightly her knuckles turned white. I turned the key the rest of the way. The engine sputtered softly, too softly, a blessing. Then another sputter, louder. Then a sharp backfire, a loud one. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. My stomach dropped. Carly whispered, voice breaking, "Oh God, Michael." The woods answered, not with voices, not with screams, not with clicks, with footsteps, dozens, all coming back, fast, too fast. I slammed the van into drive, hit the gas, and the Volkswagen lurched forward across the dirt. Branches scraped the sides, rocks kicked up behind the wheels. Carly shielded Emma with her body as I swerved around picnic tables, coolers, abandoned camp chairs. Behind us, I heard them, running, closing the distance. The forest exploding with movement as shapes darted between the trees, long limbs cutting through the dark like blades. They were on us. And the road out of Lake Vermilion campground was still a quarter-mile ahead. The night was about to become a chase. I don't know how long I stood there with my hand on that cold aluminum frame, staring at the tree line like something out there was staring back. The morning light kept shifting, almost trembling, as if it wasn't fully committed to breaking through the leaves. The ground felt softer than it should have, like the soil had been disturbed in the night. And when I finally forced myself to take one step toward the picnic table, the whole campground exhaled a long, windless sigh. Behind me, the RV door creaked open. My wife stepped out, wrapped in the same blanket she'd slept in, her hair tangled, her forehead creased with that same sleepless fear I had been trying to hide. "Did you find anything?" she asked, though her voice carried this fragile tremor that told me she already suspected the answer. I shook my head once. "Not yet." She looked around, slowly, as if any sudden movement might provoke something we couldn't see. "I don't like how it feels out here," she whispered. Neither did I, because I wasn't imagining it. The air seemed bruised somehow, thicker, duller, like after a storm, but without the storm. Just an energy shift that pressed from the outside inward. My son appeared next, rubbing his eyes with the back of his palms. He looked smaller outside the RV, almost swallowed by the towering pines around us. "Dad, did something happen last night?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. How could I tell him that the woods felt like they were remembering us? That the silence wasn't just silence, it was waiting? So instead, I forced a tired smile, the kind a parent gives when the truth is too heavy. "Just some noises," I said. "Probably animals." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't the truth. And my wife knew too. She shot me a look, the kind that says we'll talk about this later, though later felt like a questionable concept now. We sat at the picnic table, eating quietly, every bite sounding too loud in the dead stillness of the morning. No bird song, no branches cracking, no distant boats on the lake. Lake Vermilion didn't usually sleep this late. I'd been here enough to know. Something had muted the world. At one point, my wife reached down to pick up the thermos she thought she had dropped earlier, but as she reached behind her chair, she froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. "What is it?" I whispered. She didn't answer. She just pointed. There, in the damp dirt beside her chair, were footprints, not ours, not human. I moved closer, crouching down, careful not to crumble the edges. The tracks were spaced too far apart, as if whatever made them walked with long, loping strides, 4 toes, deep imprints, and a faint drag line trailing behind each one like something heavy brushed the ground as it moved. But what bothered me most wasn't the shape or the size. It was the direction. They didn't lead toward our campsite. They led away from it, as if whatever had been here had stood mere feet from where we now sat, and watched. My throat tightened. My instinct was to erase the tracks, hide them, pretend they were never there. But instead, I motioned my family back toward the RV. "Stay close," I said quietly. Inside, the air felt safer, even if the walls were thin and the locks were laughable. My wife watched me pace, her arms crossed protectively over herself. "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you?" she finally asked. I hesitated. "Not yet, but something's wrong out there, and I want to understand what before we just pack up and run." "Why?" she demanded, her voice thinning. "Why does it matter?" I didn't want to tell her the truth, that ever since last night something deeper than fear had settled into my bones, something like recognition, like the woods were trying to show me something I'd ignored for years, like the screaming we heard wasn't random or new. There was something familiar in those sounds, I murmured almost to myself. My wife looked at me as if she hadn't heard me right. Familiar? What are you talking about? Ethan? The name hit me like a stone thrown into deep water. Ethan. That was me. Ethan Wells, 45 years old, a man who had spent too many weekends chasing quiet, believing nature could cure things time couldn't. But some memories don't fade just because we pretend they didn't happen. I sank onto the narrow RV bench. I heard something like it once when I was a kid, I said, staring at the floor. On a camping trip with my father. Not here, but it was the same type of scream, the same pitch, the same human edge to it. My wife sat across from me. You never told me that, because I didn't want to remember it. The air grew colder inside the RV. My son stopped fiddling with his phone and looked up, sensing something adult and dangerous was being discussed. But before either of them could ask more, we heard it again, this time faint but unmistakable, a scream, not far, not distant. Somewhere near the shoreline. I instinctively moved toward the window, but didn't look out yet. The scream had a direction, a place it wanted me to follow. And a part of me, the part that had been awakened by last night's terror, felt like this wasn't random at all. Ethan, my wife whispered, please don't go out there. I gripped the edge of the counter, feeling the weight of the moment roll over me like cold fog. I don't want to, I said, but someone might be hurt. Or something wants you to think someone is, she countered, her voice shaking. That possibility landed heavy in the space between us. But when the second scream came, louder this time, strained with an agony that scraped the inside of my skull, something in me snapped. I opened the door. The lake glimmered through the trees like a sheet of tarnished glass. And just beyond the tree line, near the shore, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A figure. Not standing. Not walking. Crawling. Bare hands dragging through wet earth. Shoulders jerking with effort. Head lowered so low it almost brushed the ground. And then a sound from the figure, broken, desperate. Help. The word wasn't spoken so much as breathed, thin and trembling. I took a step toward them, heart pounding. Hello? I called out. Are you hurt? The figure froze. The head turned, slowly, painfully, to face me. For a split second, I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the earth, because the face looking back at me wasn't twisted in pain the way I expected. It was blank, completely empty. Eyes open but unfocused, like they weren't looking at me, but through me. And the mouth, slightly parted, moved with tiny mechanical motions as if learning how to speak. My wife called out behind me, voice cracking. Ethan, get inside now. But I couldn't turn away. Something about the figure's face, the shape of the jawline, the tilt of the brow, something triggered the deepest part of my memory, a memory I had tried to bury. Dad? The word slipped out of me before I could stop it. The figure twitched, a jerk of the left shoulder, a tilt of the head, a slow tightening of the jaw, as if my voice had activated something. I stepped closer. Dad? I whispered again. But then the figure lunged, not toward me, not toward the lake, but backwards into the trees, scrambling on all fours with unnatural speed, vanishing between the pines with a crack of branches that echoed down my spine. I stumbled back, breathing hard, hands trembling uncontrollably. My wife grabbed my arm with icy fingers. That wasn't your father, Ethan. Your father is. I know, I said, barely audible. I know. But my legs felt hollow, like the weight of something old had just settled into them, because the face I saw wasn't just similar. It was identical. I forced myself to breathe, but I couldn't shake the feeling pressing against my ribs. The feeling that the woods hadn't shown me something random. They had shown me something personal, something intentional, something that had been waiting. Behind me, my son whispered, voice barely above the wind, Dad, what if it comes back? I swallowed hard, because deep down, I knew it would. I've always believed that the desert speaks, that it carries voices in the wind, sometimes warnings, sometimes memories, sometimes things you're not meant to hear. But on the night, everything changed for me in Big Bend. I learned that the desert doesn't just speak. Sometimes it listens. My name is Evan Hale. I'm 44 years old, a paramedic from Flagstaff, Arizona, someone who's spent most of his adult life working under the pressure of split-second decisions, gore, tragedy, and chaos. I've always assumed that surviving real emergencies made me immune to the quiet, creeping fears that unsettled casual campers. But fear is a strange animal. It waits for the one moment you think you're safe. Then it shows you another version of yourself, one that you don't recognize. It was December 2022, a week before Christmas, when I drove my old Volkswagen Westfalia down into Big Bend National Park. I'd been there before, but always with coworkers or friends. This time, I was alone. I told myself I needed the quiet, needed to reset, needed distance from the last call I'd responded to, one involving a boy who reminded me of my own nephew. I didn't want holiday lights, carols, or small talk. I wanted red desert horizons, star-splattered skies, and silence so thick it felt like a blanket. And that's exactly what Big Bend gave me the moment I arrived. Heat rising off the sand even in winter, vast emptiness stretching into Mexico, and long, rugged roads where I wouldn't see another vehicle for hours. I set up camp at a dispersed site near Paint Gap, a little ways off the main route, surrounded by brittle shrubs, jagged rocks, and a level patch of desert that seemed carved out just for my RV. I remember stepping out that afternoon, breathing deep, and feeling like I'd finally stepped out of my own mind for the first time in months. No sirens, no radios, no patients calling for help. Just the low rumble of wind sweeping across the plain and the distant sound of ravens making their slow arcs across the sky. But even then, before the sun set, I noticed something odd. In the sand around my campsite were footprints. Not overwhelming, not fresh, but strange. They were spaced widely, like someone with a long stride. The edges were softened by wind, but the size was obvious, bigger than mine, wider, deeper. I crouched down, brushed my fingers through them, and told myself it was just another camper from the previous night, maybe someone hiking through. Big Bend is huge, and people wander everywhere. Still, a small thread of unease tugged at me. I wasn't sure why. There were no shoe treads, no pattern, just smooth impressions like the soles were flat or bare. That thought stuck with me longer than it should have. As dusk fell, the desert cooled fast. I made a simple dinner, climbed into the RV, and let the heat from my old propane heater fill the space. I read for a while, listened to the occasional coyote howl, and eventually turned off the lights. Outside, the wind hit the camper walls in slow gusts, each one making the metal creak like an old man shifting in his chair. I must have been asleep for about an hour when I heard it. The first sound that didn't belong. A single footstep. Heavy. Deliberate. Just outside the sliding door. I opened my eyes, my heart already beating faster than the situation justified. I didn't sit up. I didn't move. I just listened. At first, I thought maybe an animal had wandered too close. But animals shuffle, scrape, scurry, sniff. This was none of that. Another step. Then a third. Slow. Measured. As if someone was testing the sand, pressing their weight down just enough to feel solid ground. I reached for the flashlight near the bed, but didn't turn it on. Years of emergency work had trained me to freeze when something was wrong, to gather information before acting. But this wasn't a chaotic scene with people shouting. This was silence, thick, predatory silence, broken only by those careful pacing steps. The footsteps circled the van, not fast, not cautious, just purposeful. At the rear bumper, they stopped, and that's when the breathing started. Not a growl, not a pant, not a snort. Breathing. Human breathing. Deep, steady exhalations, like someone trying to warm their hands or trying to calm themselves down. I felt the back of my neck prickle. I'd responded to break-ins, assaults, domestic disputes. This was not the breathing of someone lost, confused, or harmless. This was the breathing of someone waiting. I slowly sat up, careful not to shake the van. My mind raced. Do I shout? Do I start the engine? Do I call for help? But there was no signal out there, not in that pocket of the park, and shouting might invite something I wasn't prepared for. The breathing grew louder, rising with each exhale as if the person was getting closer to the back door. My RV had flimsy old locks, nothing that would stop someone determined. The windows were thin, the walls even thinner. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of every inch of my vulnerability. The steps moved again, faster now, but still too controlled to be random. They came around the passenger side, and I could see a faint shadow under the bottom edge of the van where the moonlight caught something moving. A foot, bare, broad, dust-covered. Not a shoe, not a boot, bare skin. That's when panic finally broke through the edges of my denial. I dialed into the instincts I'd spent years ignoring whenever I camped alone, the ones that whispered that solitude can turn dangerous when someone else decides to share it. I grabbed my flashlight. My hand shook. I hated that it shook. I clicked it on, expecting to see a face in the window, but there was nothing. The beam illuminated only empty desert and scrub. The footsteps stopped again, right near the sliding door. And then the knocking began. Not frantic banging, not random tapping. 3 knocks. Slow, evenly spaced. The kind of knock someone uses when they already know you're inside. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I just stared at the door as if staring hard enough would stop whatever was outside from coming in. The knocking repeated. 3 knocks. Then silence. My chest tightened with dread so thick it felt like another presence in the van. Through the adjacent window, I finally saw something. A head. Shoulders. Too tall. Standing perfectly still. Not swaying. Not adjusting balance. Just a dark outline staring at the RV, as motionless as the rocks. I considered grabbing the keys, flooring the gas pedal, and tearing out of that campsite. But if someone was right beside the van, stepping on the gas would only bring them closer before I accelerated away. If they grabbed the handle during that moment, if they yanked hard enough, a cold sweat ran down my spine. I turned off the flashlight, sat in the dark, listened again. The wind picked up, pushing sand against the metal like soft rain. For a moment, the silhouette didn't move. Then, slowly, it tilted, like someone bending their head to peer into a window but staying just out of sight. I held my breath. The breathing outside resumed, this time faster, rougher, almost excited, and then something scraped lightly across the door. A fingertip, or a nail, tracing the metal, following the seam, testing the boundary between inside and out. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting for me to make a mistake. I kept my body still, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. I could feel my pulse drumming in my throat, hot and uneven, like it was trying to claw its way out. The scraping on the metal door traveled too slowly, as if the fingertip were savoring the texture, savoring my silence, savoring the fact that I didn't dare move. Then it stopped. For several long seconds, the desert returned to its natural rhythm. The wind brushed the sides of the RV. Sand hissed. A distant coyote howled. I thought maybe, just for a moment, that I'd imagined everything. That my exhausted mind, still wounded from the traumas I carried, had created a phantom out of shadow and noise. Then the handle on the sliding door shifted. A slight click, a tiny rattle, then a slow, deliberate pull. The lock held, but the entire door shuddered. Not violently, almost experimentally, like the person outside was testing the mechanism, checking its strength, seeing how the metal flexed under pressure. I inched toward the bed, my hands sliding silently across the blanket until it reached the small hatchet I kept under the mattress when camping alone. My fingers curled around the handle, slick with sweat despite the cold. The handle rattled again, harder this time. Another breath, deep, frustrated, fogged the window next to the door. A large oval of condensation bloomed on the glass, then slowly faded. They were close enough to breathe on the RV, close enough to see me if I moved even a little. My thoughts raced. What if I turn on the engine? What if I hit the lights? Would they run, or would they force their way in the moment I revealed where I was? I had no certainty, no plan, just fear constricting around my lungs like a fist. The person outside stepped back, their shadow lengthened in the moonlight. I could see more of the outline now, a tall, lean figure. Shoulders too high, posture too stiff, head slightly tilted like someone studying an exhibit. Then the figure crouched, slowly, soundlessly, disappearing below the window line. I froze. When they reappeared, it was at the back of the van again, directly behind the engine compartment, where the metal was thinnest. I heard the soft crunch of sand beneath their feet, the shift of their weight, and then a whisper. Not words, not even a voice. Just breath moving through teeth, like someone trying to speak but stopping at the last second. The sound was so quiet I might have dismissed it as wind, but wind doesn't make intentional sounds. Wind doesn't inhale sharply and exhale with direction. Wind doesn't lean close enough to the door for me to feel the vibration in the frame. I wanted to believe this was a person, because if it wasn't, then the alternative was something my rational mind couldn't hold. But the way it moved, the way it breathed, there was something wrong about it. Something that didn't match the familiar rhythms of human behavior. After one long moment, the figure shifted again. The footsteps circled the van, this time faster, less methodical. I felt the Westphalia rock gently with each step, as if the intruder were brushing against it, maybe dragging a hand along the siding. Then, the sound stopped at the front. The silhouette rose into view through the windshield. Just a shape, featureless but unmistakably watching me. The moon behind it made it appear darker than anything around it. A cutout of a person with no face, no detail, just a void where a head should have been. I nearly gasped, my nails dug into the hatchet handle. My legs trembled despite how hard I fought to steady them. I waited for the silhouette to move, but it stayed perfectly still, unnervingly still, like it had anchored itself into the earth. Then its hand lifted, slowly, silently. One finger extended toward the glass. Tap. A faint, single tap, not enough to crack the glass, not enough to startle, just enough to say, "I know you're awake." Tap. Tap. Each one was perfectly spaced, deliberate, like it was communicating, not knocking. "That's it," I whispered to myself, the first words I'd allowed in nearly an hour. "I'm leaving." I moved with agonizing caution, shifting toward the driver's seat. Every inch of the mattress creaked under my weight. Every breath felt like it vibrated the entire RV. I slid into the seat, keeping my head low. The figure outside didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react. Its finger lingered on the glass, motionless now. I slipped the keys into the ignition. The moment the metal clicked, the silhouette's head snapped toward the sound. My body seized with fear. I twisted the key. The engine coughed loudly, too loudly, and the figure jerked back as if startled. I slammed the shifter into gear, preparing to peel out of the campsite, but in the split second before the van lurched forward, something hit the passenger side window. A hand. Flat, wide, pale in the moonlight. It struck the glass again, harder, leaving a smudged imprint. I floored the gas. Sand kicked up from under the tires. The van lurched violently, fishtailing before catching traction. The figure darted alongside the vehicle, bare feet pounding the dirt with a speed that made my chest clench. No one should be able to run that fast. I swerved, desperate to create distance. The headlights swung wide, carving arcs of white across the desert. In the beams, for just 1 second, I saw the figure fully illuminated. It wasn't naked, but it was close. Skin tight to bone, long limbs that didn't move naturally, joints that bent with an unsettling looseness. It didn't shout or scream. It didn't even look panicked as it ran. It looked hungry. I sped onto the dirt road, the tires slamming into ruts and rocks. The Volkswagen rattled violently, the engine whining in protest, but it kept going. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figure stop abruptly at the edge of the road. It didn't chase me into the open. It just stared, its head tilted, its body still, its outline shrinking as I drove deeper into the night. Half a mile later, I could no longer see it. But I didn't slow down, not even when the road smoothed, not even when the fear began to ebb into a trembling aftershock. I kept driving until the park road met the main paved route, and then I kept going until I reached a ranger station. The lights were off. The place was closed for the night. I parked anyway, shaking, sweat-soaked, and sick to my stomach. My breathing wouldn't settle. My hands wouldn't unclench. My mind replayed every sound, every shadow, every impossible movement. And then I noticed something. On the passenger window, where the hand had slapped, was a print. But the print wasn't shaped like a normal hand. It was longer, narrower. The fingers tapered to points rather than rounded tips, and the palm was too wide at the heel, almost like it had been stretched, almost like it wasn't meant to fit a human frame. I stared at it until the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. Exhaustion collapsed over me, but not relief. Not yet. Not after what I'd heard, what I'd seen. Because as the morning wind blew across the station, carrying sand and dust with it, I thought I heard something faint. So faint, I might have blamed it on sleep deprivation. Breathing. Deep. Measured. Waiting. And it didn't sound like it was coming from outside. For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the dashboard, convinced the sound was an echo inside my own skull. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe the adrenaline had cracked something in me. Maybe the night, the silhouette, the impossible handprint. Maybe it all had rewired how I processed sound. But then the breathing came again. Not through the vents, not around the doors, not muffled by the glass. It came from behind me, a slow inhale dragging through a throat that sounded too dry, too rough, too unfamiliar to be human. The hairs along my arms stood up so sharply it hurt. My pulse hammered so violently I could hear it in my ears. I forced myself to turn my head, not all the way, just a fraction, enough to catch the faintest sliver of the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the inside of the van, dark and cluttered with the usual gear, sleeping bags, stacked boxes, the corner of the bed, nothing out of place, nothing moving. But the breathing didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, as if someone were inches behind my neck, leaning forward in the shadowed cabin. That was impossible. The van had never opened. No door had slid, no window had cracked. I would have heard it. I had been listening so carefully, so painfully alert, that even the shift of sand under the tires registered like thunder. But the sound was real. I swallowed hard, my throat so dry the motion scraped like sandpaper. I reached for the flashlight again, my hand trembling violently, and clicked it on with a snap. The beam exploded into the back of the RV. Empty. Just the mattress. Just the blankets. Just the storage compartments. Nothing living or breathing or crouching in the tiny darkness that could have produced that terrible, deliberate sound. Yet even with the flashlight illuminating every corner, the breathing continued, now shifting, moving, circling me, as though woven through the air itself. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the light. "This isn't real," I whispered, but the words lacked conviction. They sounded thin, pathetic, like a lie told by someone who desperately wanted to believe it. Then something moved on the back window. At first I thought it was dust blowing across the glass, but it wasn't dust. It was a smear, forming slowly and deliberately, as if traced by an unseen fingertip sliding across from the outside. A thin, shaky line, then another, then another. 3 long, uneven streaks, like claw marks made by someone refusing to be forgotten. I jerked around and shined the flashlight through the back window. Nothing. No silhouette. No figure. Only the vast early morning desert, pale and empty under a graying sky. My thoughts split in 2 directions, one half clinging to rationality, the other plunging into something far older and colder than logic. Big Bend holds countless stories, lost hikers, strange lights, whispered legends from people who've lived near the border long enough to understand there are things the desert shelters and things it chases out. But nothing explained this. I needed help. Not theories, not explanations. Just another person. Just someone awake in this godforsaken place. The ranger housing area wasn't far, just past the main station, perched on a small rise. 2 buildings, maybe 3. I could see the faint outline of a porch light flickering as dawn approached. I started the van again, but this time I didn't flinch. I pushed the gas pedal like the vehicle was an extension of my own fear and rolled slowly up the small hill. When I parked, I didn't turn the engine off. I left the headlights washing over the building's siding as I stepped out. The cold morning air slapped me hard, grounding me for the first time since the nightmare began. I walked to the nearest door and knocked. Not gently, urgently. No answer. I knocked again, louder. The wood echoed in the quiet, still morning. Finally, a voice filtered through from inside. 1 second. A porch light flicked on. A bolt slid open. The door cracked. A ranger, mid-50s, tired eyes, gray stubble, looked out at me. "Morning, you okay?" I must have looked like hell because his expression shifted from groggy irritation to something closer to concern. Something happened at my campsite. I managed, my voice barely more than a rasp. Something followed me. Someone. I don't know. He opened the door wider. "Come inside." The warmth of the cabin felt unreal after the long night. A small heater hummed in the corner. The walls were plastered with maps, safety notices, and park information. Everything orderly. Everything human. "What did you see?" he asked. I told him. Not everything, because even I didn't believe everything, but enough. The footsteps, the knocking, the silhouette, the handprint, the figure chasing the van. He listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened once, maybe twice, but otherwise he stayed calm. When I finished, he walked to a cabinet, pulled out a radio, and contacted another ranger on duty. When he returned, he said quietly, "We'll take your report, and we'll check the site. But there's something you should know." I leaned forward, the air tightening around me. "You're not the first." Those words hit me harder than the knocking on the RV door. "What do you mean?" He rubbed the bridge of his nose. In the past 3 months, late fall into winter, we've had 4 separate reports from dispersed sites. People hearing footsteps, someone circling their vehicles, a figure in the dark, always at night, always alone campers, always near Paint Gap or the adjacent areas. My stomach dropped. "Did you find anything?" He hesitated. "Tracks. What kind?" He didn't answer immediately. He crossed the room, pulled open a drawer, and took out a small, clear evidence bag. Inside it was a photograph, grainy, taken at night, the edges blurred, but the print pressed deep into sand was unmistakable, long, narrow, fingers tapering to unnatural points. My breath caught in my chest. It looked exactly like the smear on my van window, exactly like the hand that slapped the glass. "What is it?" I whispered. The ranger shook his head. "We don't know. We sent photos to wildlife experts. Nothing matches. Not mountain lions, not bears, not primates, and definitely not human." A cold wave of dread washed through me. Then what? A bang hit the side of the house. Both of us froze. Another bang, harder, vibrated the wall. Then another. 3 knocks, slow, evenly spaced. My blood ran cold. The ranger stepped back from the door, his eyes wide now. He reached for his sidearm, motioning me to stay still. The knocks came again, this time on the back wall of the house. We moved together, carefully, to the window. He drew back the curtain just an inch. Outside, in the pale morning glow, a figure stood behind the house. The same height, the same shape, the same impossible stillness. Its head tilted, just slightly, just enough to see us peering through the glass. Then its hand lifted. The same pointed fingers, the same slow, deliberate motion. And as it raised its hand, I realized something with a clarity so sharp it nearly split me open. It wasn't here for me. It was here because I had escaped. And it wasn't done. The ranger lowered the curtain so fast it snapped against the window frame. His hand trembled around the grip of his sidearm, but his voice, when he spoke, was somehow steady. "Stay away from the windows," he whispered. I backed up until my shoulders touched the opposite wall. Every nerve in my body felt electrified, screaming to flee, but my legs wouldn't move. The ranger paced the room with sharp-clipped steps, trying to see the figure from another angle, trying to get eyes on it without opening anything. But the moment he reached the rear window, 3 more knocks hit the siding, each one perfectly aligned with where he stood. He froze. So did I. The knocks grew slower, more deliberate, like the thing outside knew exactly where we were and wanted us to understand that no wall, no matter how thick, was going to hide us. The ranger swallowed. "I'm calling backup." His radio crackled when he keyed it. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Coleman at Station B. We've got a possible intruder at my cabin. Request immediate." A deafening crash cut through the room. Not glass, not wood. Metal. My stomach lurched as the sound reverberated through the cabin. Metal being dragged across the ground behind the building, scraping the dirt with a teeth-clenching shriek. Coleman's voice faltered. "What the hell could be moving metal out here?" I couldn't answer. My throat felt locked, my breath shallow. The only metal I'd seen behind the cabin earlier was an old utility trough. Huge, rusted, far too heavy for any person to drag without equipment. But the sound outside made it very clear. Something was dragging it. Not struggling. Not straining. Dragging it casually, as if testing the weight of a toy. The scraping came closer, circling behind the cabin, moving with the same measured deliberation as the footsteps around my van hours before. The ranger motioned for me to crouch behind the small wooden desk. Then he moved toward the door, sidearm raised. The metal trough stopped moving. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the desert wind seemed to vanish, as if holding its breath. I could hear nothing outside. Not footsteps, not breathing, not shifting sand. The stillness pressed into the cabin, making every sound inside too loud. The tick of the heater, my shallow breaths, my pounding heart. Then the doorknob began to turn. Slow at first, testing, feeling the motion of the metal. Coleman didn't shout, didn't order it to stop. He simply lifted the gun, bracing his arms with terrifying calm. The knob twisted more, until it reached the locked position and stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the doorknob slowly rotated back the other way, retreating into its original position. Coleman exhaled shakily. "It knows it's locked." He stepped back from the door, his breath fogging in the cold morning air. The heater, for all its effort, wasn't helping. The temperature had dropped noticeably. My fingers felt numb. The ranger motioned toward the back room. "We're moving. The bedroom has no exterior doors. Interior walls are thicker. We wait for backup there." I followed him into the small bedroom, barely large enough for a single bed, a dresser, and a closet. The room felt even colder, as though something had drawn the warmth out of it. Coleman closed the door softly. We stood in silence. For a minute. 2, 3. Then, tap, 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 on the bedroom window. Coleman's face drained of color. He raised the gun toward the window but didn't move closer. I held my breath as I stared at the thin curtain covering the glass. The tapping repeated, this time lighter, almost playful. The ranger jerked his chin toward me, signaling to stay low. Then he approached the window inch by inch until he reached the curtain. He hesitated only a second before he whisked it back. The window was empty. Nothing stood there. No figure, no shadow, no trace of movement. But in the corner of the window, the very bottom edge, was a smear. A long, dust-covered finger mark. One single print, traced upward as if something short or something crouched had reached only far enough to leave a mark and then vanished. Coleman's breath left him in a shaky exhale. It's playing with us. Then, from the front of the cabin, a scream. Not a human scream, a shrill, drawn-out wail that carried through the walls like metal being bent. A sound that rose sharply, then dropped into a low, rattling vibrato before cutting off abruptly. The ranger nearly dropped his radio. "That wasn't human," I whispered. "No," he agreed quietly. "It wasn't." The screaming resumed, this time farther away, echoing across the desert. Not one scream. 2, 3, layered, intertwined, almost like multiple voices imitating the first. Then everything fell silent again. No wind, no birds, not even insects. Just silence so absolute it felt alive. Coleman grabbed a flashlight and pointed toward the bedroom floor. "Under the bed. Now." "What? Why?" But he didn't wait. He got down first, checked for space, then motioned me to follow. The bed sat a few inches off the ground. Tight fit, but enough. I slid beneath the frame, the cold floor biting into my palms. The ranger crouched close by, his gun angled toward the door, his breathing quiet but rapid. Minutes dragged. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy, dragging. Not outside, inside. Something was in the cabin. My skin went cold. The footsteps moved through the front room, pads of bare feet sliding across the wood. A low, almost curious hum vibrated through the walls. Coleman pressed a finger to his lips. I held my breath so tightly my chest hurt. The footsteps drew closer to the bedroom door. Stopped. Then another knock. 3. Evenly spaced, on the bedroom door. The handle twisted once, twice. Then it rattled violently, shaking the entire door frame. Coleman crouched lower, aiming upward, preparing for the worst. The handle stopped moving. The silence stretched so long I felt nausea creeping up my throat. Then, in one sudden, horrifying motion, something began sniffing under the door. A wet inhale, a long, rattling exhale, another inhale. Closer, closer, and then a finger, thin, pale, impossibly long, slid under the gap between the floor and the door. It curled upward, feeling the air, feeling for us. Coleman raised the gun, eyes wide, breath shaking. The finger retreated. Silence. Then the footsteps moved away, slow, deliberate, toward the front door. We waited. Every second stretched into eternity. The front door creaked open. Something stepped out. Then the door closed. The footsteps faded into the desert. Only when the silence settled again did Coleman finally speak. "We're leaving," he whispered. "Now."